Twice in one day. So on Wednesday, we had just started finishing up our conversation about these eco-evolutionary relationships. And we had a great conversation about some examples where we can see these relationships occurring. So we more or less just ended class looking at if we made a change to an ecosystem, okay, what does that ecosystem look like was the first thing we needed to do. What might the ecosystem changes be? So we introduced the idea of these trophic cascades, right? So changes or waterfall effects in the trophic system or trophic levels. And then lastly, right, we needed to start thinking about what the evolutionary changes from these would be. So we really thought about what are the links or feedbacks from one to the other. Then at the very end of class, we just restarted talking about the very last idea we were going to look at for this unit, which is when we first started talking about this, we considered the fact that evolution was so important to consider because it occurs on the same time scales as evolution, as ecology. I think I just used the word evolution twice. It is a Friday, guys. I'm sorry. Evolution and ecology occur on the same time scales, right? Within this 1 to 10 generation time span, which for some organisms mean within a year, right? Because we have generational turnover sometimes 4 times a year. But for most of the time, it means in about a decade, we would see some sort of change that humans can recognize. When we're looking at phenotypic plasticity, hey, this is something that occurs much, much faster. But the big difference here is where, right, something like evolution, oops, I'm nailing this, aren't I? One more time, there we go. Evolution is, of course, a genetic change. Remember, that was one of the core pieces we needed. Okay, variation, inheritance, right? So that second piece, right, insisted that it needed to have a gene. Okay, phenotypic plasticity has no genetic changes. So we ended class talking about how this is really our twin syndrome, right? Where the environmental effects that you are exposed to are going to alter the expression of those genes. Yep, that is really not the greatest way to write the word expression because it's impossible to read. Let's try that again. Okay, so we talked about how when you first met the set of twins that you know, or if you are a set of twins secretly, right, when you were very, very young, okay, they looked a lot alike, right, because remember, Mama fed them all the same, it was the same applesauce, right, they rode in the same stroller, so all of the environmental conditions that they were exposed to were the same, so they looked at least very, very similar. It was difficult to tell them apart. But probably by the time that you graduated high school, it was very easy to tell them apart. Okay, and it was not just because you got to know them and they had different personalities because they're people. Okay, but also because by the time that they were graduating high school, that they were also grown into their own identity. So they made different decisions. how much they ate for dinner, what sports they played, right? Whether or not they were naughty, snuck out and smoked cigarettes, whatever it was, all of these things had effects, okay? How much they tanned, all of that business. Okay? I had twin aunts, and by the time I was a kid, I could easily tell the difference between my Aunt Ann and my Aunt Kathy. Okay, and it wasn't just their haircuts, which of course was the era of the 80s, so fabulous feathering. Okay, and the turtle shell eyeglasses. Okay, what weight they were, how much sun they had taken in. My Aunt Kathy had smoked her entire life, and my Aunt Ann had not. By my entire life, I mean these girls have grown up in the 60s and 70s, so like from 11 and up, right? It's a different world, people. And all of this has a significant effect on your teeth, on your skin, on your fingers. And I don't care, I'm not judging. All I'm saying is you can tell, right? Okay? And my Aunt Ann was a different creature in so many ways. Let me tell you. Okay? But the point is, okay, the decisions that they live together still, which is super weird. They're like almost 50 and they definitely live together still. It's a whole thing, guys. My point is that despite all of that, the decisions that they made it very obvious, right? So things like the sun, the amount of sun that you take in, right, is going to express different amounts of melanin in your skin to protect your skin, right? Or it's going to wrinkle, or it's going to dry, okay? So that gene expression, and we're not changing the genes, you're still going to have, my twin aunts have the same DNA if they had kids. They're going to give the same DNA, okay? But they themselves look different because the genes have been expressed differently by the environment they've been exposed to. So this is that word plastic. Okay, think that you can bend a piece of plastic, okay, but we can't like bend a hard piece of steel, right? So being plastic is like being flexible. And just like your twins, okay, this is very fast changes. Okay, we didn't have to wait until your twin friends had children to see any differences. This was as they were growing up, we could see them change and diverge, right? And they're not huge changes necessarily, but they're subtle enough that you can notice them in one lifetime, your lifetime. Their lifetime, more importantly, which is the same. Okay, conceptually that makes sense? Okay, so let's look at, and this is where we stopped on Wednesday. Let's look at how exactly this works. Okay, so remember, for the most part, we've largely talked about the phenotype of an organism being drawn more or less directly from the genetics, right? Classic Mendelian stuff. Okay, I have two alleles, okay, a big A and a little a, that makes me tall. Done. Next question. Okay. But we know at our core, our heart of hearts, things are not that simple for so many things. Okay, I know that the way I think isn't that straightforward, the way I behave isn't that straightforward. I know my skin tone isn't that straightforward. So most traits, even height, okay, isn't that straightforward. If I take steroids, okay, that's going to make me shorter. Please? Okay, so we know that these environmental factors, the fact that I took steroids, okay, to try to bulk up, okay, obviously are going to affect my phenotypic expression. Okay, so then ultimately, how these genes are being turned on or not so the environment matters. known. We're basically just putting words to it now. So what we ultimately care about is when the environment is actively going to come in and turn on and off our genes. Okay, so when I'm out in the sun, and that's going to tell my skin genes, make more melanin. Okay, when I take those steroids and it accidentally tells my growth genes to shut off. Okay, that's the place where phenotypic plasticity occurs. Okay, the interaction between our genotype or our genetics and the environment. Okay, that's not so bad. So let's see what this looks like. How does this actually manifest itself in a way that's valuable to the conversation we've been having? Twins are interesting, but that's not what we've really been talking about. Okay, so if we have two different environments, okay, one without predators, one with predators, right? That's one we've commonly been talking about. Okay, or the fish example we had, right? One with food that's at the bottom of the lake, one with food that's at the top of the lake. And whatever it is, two different types of environmental scenarios. Right? Then what we can do is look at how do these different environments affect the expression of our phenotypic traits. Okay, in this case, we would just look at one. We're going to keep it simple. Okay, so if we were doing, for example, that fish one with the food at the bottom or the top, then our phenotypic trait might be mouth position. And so we could track how the mouth position moves from pointed downward to pointed upward. We're going to walk through an example, don't worry. Just kind of setting you up for what we should expect here. Okay, so let's do an environment that has no predator versus we're going to add a predator. So these are our two environmental options. Okay. So maybe we're still in a pond. Okay, and our first version of the environment, okay, is a nice, safe, quiet pond community. And our second option is a dangerous one where a big top predator has been added. Okay, so what we want to ask ourselves then is what is the expression of a phenotypic trait if there is no predator, right? Because there's no reason to be putting on armor or dragging out swords if everything's safe, right? You live in a safe neighborhood. It's the 1970s. People didn't even lock their doors, right? That's what they always say. But when there's danger around, Then we're going to invest that energy. We're going to take energy out of our growth, or out of our reproduction. We're going to invest it in protection, right? You live in a more dangerous neighborhood, you're going to take money out of your funds, invest it in better door locks, right? Invest it in a ring, right? The doorbell kind, not the expensive jewelry kind. Or a security system, whatever it is, right? Better floodlights, right? Same kind of system here. We're going to invest it in spines, okay? A pointy tail, being poisonous, okay? Whatever the case is, okay? We're going to invest ourselves in some kind of phenotypic trait, okay? The expression of which we already have it in our DNA, so we're just going to invest it in the expression triggered by having that predator there. Still with me? Okay. So here, this might be under the no predator cue, we might have no spines or very little spines, right? Because again, why invest in expressing a security system if you don't need it? It's never going to be used, right? But when we add that predator cue, okay, this triggers. It's the environmental cue that's going to trigger, okay, that protein or that gene expression, okay? These angry big spines. Okay, that's our security system. The aunt that sits in the sun all day. Looks weird and leathery by the time that she's 50. Don't want the kisses. Also, her breath smells weird. And she doesn't let you touch her weird glass animal collection. You don't like going to Auntie's house. Seriously, all these little glass animals. Her house was so weird, guys. I can't even tell you. Okay, this makes sense? So there's a couple of things that we're getting from here. Rats are frazzle. Right, I'm going to move my big spines down a little bit so we can see that. Ultimately, we have a spectrum of responses here. If we're in an environment that has absolutely no predator, okay, we're in the world's safest neighborhood, we're going to be super relaxed with our security system, right? So we're probably really not going to have any spines at all. If, right, because we're thinking about this as a good x-axis, if we're thinking about this on the far end, if we're in a lake or pond or whatever that has a lot of really big top predators, I'm probably going to really invest in some fierce security. And I'm going to have some really big spines. It's going to make me difficult to eat, unpalatable. Very loud in the hallway, given that it's like halfway through class. Okay, but this is not going to be a dichotomous choice. Okay, we're going to have more than binary responses, on or off. Okay, so that's what we see here. Okay, if you have a few predators, okay, so you have a very light cue, okay, a small environmental response in the water, okay, it's still going to trigger making those proteins that's going to cause growth of these spines, right? But you're not going to grow like the biggest Excalibur bladed tail in existence, right? Because you've only gotten a little bit of a Q, and that's only going to make a little bit of protein. So you can get a gradient of response depending on how much of that environmental Q goes. Just like if you think about your twins, if you have an aunt that only spends a little time in the sun, right? She's only going to get a little bit of melanin, a little bit of leathery skin. Okay, whereas if you get the weird aunt that spends like way too much time in the sun, she's going to get a lot of melanin, a lot of leathery skin. So you get a gradient of responses. It's not no leather or all leather, right? There's a nice gradient in between of crazy. Okay, if it helps, remember when I'm talking about these spines. Remember I'm talking about these things here on their butts for imagery. Although if you are just picturing like taping swords to things' butts, that's also pretty cool. Because now I'm kind of picturing taping swords to things' butts. But I'm also picturing my crazy aunt's glass animal collection. So I'm kind of in a weird place today. And I am definitely going to post like images of what these things were so you guys can appreciate this weekend. Okay, any questions about this stuff? Do you guys watch Bob's Burgers? Do you remember like the weird animal collection that Linda, or like cherub doll, kind of like that, but as animals? Okay, any questions about this thing? I'm very distractible today. Oh shoot, I had it right here. It's much more dramatic to flip all the way back to the first page, right? So as we think about these with animals, right, these are the spines we were just talking about. And of course, we have this nice dramatic helmet as well. These are the sorts of things that you could put on in a single generation. Okay, and I have a plant version of this as well. Okay, plants can make themselves spiny and spiky. They can also make themselves leathery. Okay, they can release small toxins. We talked about size. Okay, being able to grow or stunt your growth is another really common one, particularly in fishes. Males do this in particular because males don't need to be as big to be able to breed because they're not carrying any offspring or eggs, right? So they can stunt their growth and still be successful breeders if there are predators around, so you tend to see smaller males. You can stay small and nobody wants to eat you, right? So all of these are really common ways either within your generation, okay, or within 1 or 2 generations, right? So your offspring can kind of get a really quick leg up because you experienced this cue, right? And so the gene expression gets kick-started in you, and so your babies then get this. Whereas with classic evolution, even though we know that can happen quick, right, that still can take several generations to get a good, permanent, fixed gene change in our population gene pool. Okay, so the real benefit of phenotypic plasticity is it's a now response. The predators are here now, and so I can respond now to try to not die. And when they leave, right, we can stop investing. Okay, when the neighborhood's safer. Okay, so if you have a migratory population, things like wolves, for example, or lions that aren't around all the time, okay, we can turn on these sorts of things when they're there, okay? And then if they don't come back next year because it's dry or whatever, wear it. Don't need to invest in it. All right, so here we see an example in the fish. We were talking about body size being a common response. All right, so skinny fish are common both because I'm less appetizing, but I'm also more hydrodynamic, so I can swim faster. Okay, chonky fish, okay, would be in a no predator system. Okay, I don't need to swim fast, or I can be a little more luxurious with my life. And I'm also fatter, so I would normally be a much more attractive meal. Or if you were buying fish at a fish market, some obvious choices here on which way you would want to go. It's the same for like a heron that would be picking. Okay, so you don't actually need to pull your books open because I have everything you need here. But so let's practice this, and this will be the last thing we do. So in Florida, there are a couple of different types of lizards. Okay, this is the Cuban brown. Isn't he cute? Okay, and they're affecting the natives. Anoles is just a type of lizard. Okay, so we have trees. They live on the perches, aka branches. So after the brown lizards invaded, our native lizards had to move up higher. Okay, climb up higher in the trees. Okay, our lizards end up climbing because they have sticky toe pads. Okay, they look basically suction cups on their feetsies. So after the invasion, these peeps ended up testing the sticky toe pads. Okay, the larger suction cups on your toe pads, okay, improve the ability to grab smaller branches. Okay, so if we picture a tree, okay, smaller branches are found at the top. Okay, where it gets kind of like spindly and weird. That green guy looks like he has an attitude problem. I think we can all agree with that as well. Okay. Everybody understand the issues? Okay. So we've got two types of lizards. The green guy is native. The brown guy got all up in his grill. So the green guy fled up the tree. Okay. After this happened, we measured toe pad size to see what the effect on the lizards were. That's our question. Nope, please bite me. Okay, so we don't really have time to make a true bar graph. But what I want you to do is make like a dirty one on what you got. And compare our results between our invaded and uninvaded areas. And think about how can we tell whether something is due to evolution or phenotypic plasticity. And the lizard will be judging you for the rest of class. You should have 4 graphs, right? Yes, 4 graphs. Okay, I want to touch on one thing real quick because you're going to need it. What is a common garden experiment? This is a new term, right? We all know what wild caught means, right? That one's pretty straightforward. What is our wild caught? Yes, right. So these are ones we walked out, grabbed a lizard off a tree and said, "This is my lizard." Okay. Measured the lizard, released the lizard. Okay. So wild caught are literally lizards on trees. What in the heckin' is a common garden experiment? That one that you might have like affected, done something to raise one or exactly. All right. So common gardens. This is a really common experiment type. So common gardens are a way for us to make sure that there aren't any environmental effects. So our common gardens are home-reared, homegrown lizards. So we're going to take a bunch of lizards. We're going to bring them back to the lab. And we're going to grow them up in the exact same laboratory conditions. Usually for like 3 generations. So we're going to erase all their environmental memory. Okay, so hot, cold, birch tree, maple tree, all of that business is gone. Okay, except for the thing that we're still interested in. High on the tree, low on the tree. Okay, so we're still keeping this invaded, uninvaded business. Okay, but everything else is exactly the same. So super controlled. Okay, keeping that in mind, okay, what does the common garden experiment give us in any case? Why would you bother to do that? It's a lot of work, man. Let me tell you, having done them, it's a lot of your life you don't get back. And you're the mother to many animals. Why did we do that here? What did it tell us? Is it different than the wild caught in this case? Do we have really significant data here? Okay, let's just look at the uninvaded part. Are these numbers very different from each other? Not really, right? How about these ones? Are these super different from each other? Kind of, and not really. Okay. And more importantly, are the relationship between these two numbers different from the relationship between these two numbers? No. Okay. But this is important, right? So the wild caught looks the same as the common garden. Okay. The common garden has taken out the environmental part. Of evolution versus plasticity, which of those two deals with environment? Plasticity, right? So our common garden experiment removes plasticity. Good thing I drew in green over the green lizard, right? So if our common garden is the same as the wild caught, it's basically saying plasticity is not what's driving this. If our common garden was different than the wild caught, then it would say that plasticity is what's driving this. Because the wild caught is the true version, right? That's what's actually happening. I'm going to shut up because I ran over for the first time all semester. Okay, make sure that makes sense.